Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I listened to Senator Lee asking these questions. It occurred to me that you were one of a very, very, very small minority of members who opposed the USA Freedom Act that I drafted with Senator Lee. It passed with a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. Even though you voted against it, and this, of course, stopped the bulk collection by NSA that both Senator Lee and I opposed, do you agree the executive branch has to follow the law that they cannot reinstate the bulk collection of America's phone records without amending federal statutes?
Senator Leahy, that appears to be so, and I can't swear that that's absolutely, totally always true, but it appears to be so.
Well, wait a minute. We either passed the law or we didn't pass the law. Supermajority voted for the Leahy law. The president signed into law. You voted against it. Will you uphold the law?
I will follow the law, yes, sir.
And will you commit you're not going to allow the NSA to gauge in the bulk collection of Americans' records in violation of the USA Freedom Act based on a theory that somehow whoever is president has the power to disregard the statute?
I do not believe that the statute can be disregarded, and it should be followed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We had a dust-up in the press. As you recall, when Mr. Trump bragged about how he had grabbed women and so on, you, shortly after the tape came out, and I realize there's an explanation here, you said, I don't characterize that as sexual assault. But then you said later, the weekly standards characterization of comments I made following Sunday's presidential debate is completely inaccurate. My hesitation is based solely on confusion of the contents of the 2005 tape, the hypothetical posed by the reporter, which was asked in a chaotic post-debate environment. Of course, it is crystal clear that assault is unacceptable. I would never intentionally suggest otherwise. That's basically what you said after the confusion on your first comment. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Thank you. Is grabbing a woman by her genitals without consent, is that sexual assault?
Clearly, it would be.
Thank you. If a sitting president or any other high federal official was accused of committing what the president-elect described in a context in which it could be federally prosecuted, would you be able to prosecute and investigate?
The president is subject to certain lawful restrictions, and they would be required to be applied by the appropriate law enforcement official if appropriate, yes.
And the conduct described, based on the description, would be sexual assault?
Well, the confusion about the question was a hypothetical question, and it related to what was said on the tape. I did not remember at the time whether this was suggested to be an unaccepted, unwanted, would certainly meet the definition. If that's what the tape said, then that would be...
My question is very simple. Is grabbing a woman by her genitals without consent, is that sexual assault?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you were asked earlier about having called the NAACP and the ACLU un-American. You said that was before you were a senator. But as a senator, you have continued to be hostile to them. You criticize nominees for having what you call ACLU DNA. Now, I remember when Republicans led the Justice Department, as Inspector General found the Bush administration engaged in unlawful politicized hiring practices. That's the Republican administration's own Inspector General. They said the Ashcroft Justice Department used litmus tests whether applicants would be sufficiently conservative. If they're ever in the ACLU, they couldn't have a job. You said in a radio interview, justice has to be saved from secular, progressive liberals. Okay, let me ask you a couple simple questions. Are an individual's religious beliefs relevant to their employment at the Justice Department?
Not unless it's such that they can't perform their duties in
would
an
be-
honorable way consistent with the law.
What would be an example of that?
Well, if an individual so strongly believed that abortion should be unlawful that they use their position to block constitutionally approved abortions, I think that would make them not subject to being employed in the Department of Justice.
Are you going to have a litmus test at the Department of Justice for people who've worked at civil rights organizations?
No.
Senator Graham mentioned you've long been a champion of states' rights, and certainly you and I have had enough discussions on that, and I realize those are deeply held beliefs. But states have also voted on an issue of marijuana and regulation. I believe your own state of Alabama permits the use of a derivative of marijuana known as CBD oil, legal in Alabama, illegal under federal law. If you are confirmed as the nation's chief law enforcement official, and you know that we have very, very limited federal resources. In fact, we're spending about a third of our budget now just to keep the prisons open because of mandatory minimums and whatnot. Would you use our federal resources to investigate and prosecute sick people who are using marijuana in accordance with their state laws, even though it might violate federal law?
Well, I won't commit to never enforcing federal law, Senator Leahy, but absolutely it's a problem of resources for the federal government. The Department of Justice under Lynch and Holder set forth some policies that they thought were appropriate to define what cases should be prosecuted in states that have legalized, at least in some fashion, some parts of
Do you agree with those guidelines?
I think some of them are truly valuable in evaluating cases, but fundamentally, the criticism I think that was legitimate is that they may not have been followed. Using good judgment about how to handle these cases will be a responsibility of mine. I know it won't be an easy decision, but I will try to do my duty in a fair and just way.
The only reason I mention it, you've been some very strong views. You even mandated the death penalty for anyone convicted of a second drug trafficking offense, including marijuana, even though mandatory death penalties are, of course, unconstitutional.
Well, I'm not sure under what circumstances I said that, but I don't think that sounds like something I would normally say. We're glad to look at it,
Would you say that's not your view today?
It is not my view today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.